Howdy guys, Rex here. In this video, we're going to talk about how to mount your Riflescope. This is part 3 of our series, Riflescope Operation 101. If you missed part 1 or part 2, please go ahead and check that out. We got lots of information on these videos explaining how Riflescopes work, how to get them set up, and we will continue on with how to bore sight them, how to establish a gross zero, and how to fine-tune a true statistical zero. The test rifle we're using for the purposes of this demonstration is an SSG 08A1 in 7.62 NATO. It comes with a Picatinny rail extending over the base and across the top of the barrel to the front of the handguards. The Riflescope we're going to be using for the purposes of this demonstration is an Arkin SH4 Generation 2 6-24 with minute of angle adjustments and minute of angle scale reticle. I can honestly say that over the last 35 years of centerfire rifle shooting, I've mounted countless Riflescopes, and I've seen it done lots of different ways. I think that oftentimes people get fixated on specialized tools and equipment rather than understanding exactly what's going on. You don't need a lot of tools if you know how to do this properly. Actually, the way I still prefer to do it, after all my years of experience and seeing it done in a variety of different ways, gunsmiths, gun shops, military armorers, if you understand what's going on mechanically with thermal expansion and contraction, with the thread contact surfaces of the screws, and what you're trying to accomplish, you don't need a lot of tools to do that if you know what's going on. If you pay close attention to the little techniques I'm going to show you on how I like to do it, it's going to save you a lot of headache in the long run. You have to consider that after mounting your Riflescope, that rifle is going to be subjected to a variety of different environments. Cold weather, hot weather, you're going to have thermal expansion and contraction. You're going to have your greases and oils work into things differently. So if you pay attention to some of these details, you're going to accelerate a lot of these break-in processes as you're mounting the scope so that you're not continuously tightening down the mounts, retightening the strings, re-indexing everything, realigning everything. Hopefully you're going to have this done right the first time so that it stays zeroed for you. One of the first things you guys are going to want to do is degrease all the components. These things are packed in grease and oil for transit and storage. You're going to want to get the grease and oil off the receiver, the base, the screws, the rings, the ring caps, any of the threaded components, minus some of the QD throw levers and cam surfaces. Then you're going to need to affix the scope base to the receiver. Unless the receiver has an integral scope base built into it, you're going to make sure that it is properly oriented. A lot of these bases do have a taper to them. You're going to want to make sure it's ramped up in the back. Make sure you have determined the proper base placement to ensure the optic and rifle functions. Depending on how your rifle is set up, how the bolt is situated, there are certain spots where things being mounted might not operate properly. So what I like to do is put everything together first for a dry run to ensure that the mechanical operation of the rifle is not inhibited in any way. And you're going to want to ensure that all the screws are a proper length and that the action still functions when it's fully tightened down. A lot of bolt actions like the Remington 700, the front screws in the scope base are actually going to come through the receiver, and if you have a screw that's switched around, some of the screws are longer. You have to know which screw goes where. If you get screws switched around and the longer ones are in the wrong spot, they're going to penetrate through the receiver into the area where the bolt is going to lock. And those screws can actually inhibit the operation of the bolt locking by rubbing on the lugs. And so you need to tighten everything down and then make sure everything is operating properly. Likewise, if you have screws that are too short, you want to make sure you get adequate thread contact when you put the screw in. Sometimes if you get too short of a screw, or if you have your screws switched around, you don't pay close attention that there are long ones and short ones, that screw might only get a turn or 2 turns in on the thread, and it might work for a short amount of time, but after recoil, that thing's going to strip off and pop out, and you will have major problems. So we have the scope base. These little blocks here are going to index with the slots. So these are going to fit between the slots. And then this is going to, when we screw it in, pinch down and grab onto the rail like so. So we're going to put this on in a spot that seems about right. And we are going to have a little bit of wiggle. That is these 3 blocks fitting in between these slots with a little bit of room. Okay, that little bit of room is going to move a little bit under recoil. So I can anticipate when the rifle recoils backwards, that's going to move this to the front on a bolt action. We don't have any forward slam, like on a semi-auto. So if I move this all the way back to where it's seated backwards for this bolt action, we have a little bit of room all the way back. Now it's going to be fully seated in these slots forward, so that when the rifle recoils back, this is still pushing and has full contact in the right direction. So when you're setting the base to the receiver of the rifle, you're going to want to set it a little bit forward for recoil if needed. There is a break-in process that happens with the micro texture of the finish on the base and the receiver sometimes. So what I like to do is seat the base onto the receiver or into the Picatinny rail. If there are slots or however that unit is going to grab on, I like to kind of shimmy it around, rub it into place a little bit, make sure that all the surfaces are smoothed out. If you look at these things with the microscope, there is a micro texture. It looks like carpet. What you want to do is make sure that's all flattened out. That way you can tighten the screws down and you have that fully tightened without having to wait for the recoil to go ahead and smooth out those surfaces, in which case those screws will end up being loose again and they will work themselves looser and looser shot after shot. So go ahead and seat that in, rub it in, and you can artificially break in the micro texture of the finish. Now there are some special applications where you're going to want to use thread locker or perhaps even bond the base to the receiver. For extreme high precision applications, there are preferences by many shooters to actually permanently bond the base to the receiver. Some armorers and gunsmiths will use Loctite 380 Black Max or JB Weld to actually make sure these bases are properly affixed to the receiver. For example, on my single shot 375 ShyTac, which is a rifle designed to shoot out to 3,000 plus meters, the gunsmith who built that rifle specializes in ELR maximum precision platforms. That scope base is actually permanently affixed to that receiver to ensure there's 100% contact. Nothing's going to ever work its way loose. Most applications, you're not going to have to get that radical. For most applications, thread locker is going to work plenty enough. I like to use the blue kind. After everything's degreased, make sure you put a couple drops on the threads as per instructions, lock it in and torque it down. Then you're going to attach the base using your screws with the proper amount of thread locker, and you're going to want to go to the proper torque specifications. From an engineering perspective, there are proper torque specifications for a reason. The contact of the threads will be optimal when it's torqued to the proper torque. One thing I like to do is torque it down, back off a little bit, torque it down again, back off a little bit, and do it again. This is artificially breaking in the micro texture and machining marks inside the threads to make sure that any micro burrs, aberrations, or texture flaws are going to be smoothed out, and you'll find that each time you tighten it, it's going to go a little bit farther. Once it reaches the point to where it's not tightening down anymore, that's the point in which that screw is fully torqued down. Then go ahead and quantify your torque. Make sure you don't exceed that and you are set. Now, if you are going to paint your rifle, most of my rifles that I use in the field, I end up painting at some point. You're going to want to apply thin coats of paint on all the contact surfaces in which the base and the scope mounts and the rings are going to come into contact. If you get too thick of paint, you're going to have gradual deformation under recoil, and thermal contraction expansion is going to cause all those different metal parts to unevenly mate together as they're flexing under the plasticity of the finish. So if you can do very thin coats, let the thing fully dry before you torque it down, that's the best way to go. If you want to go OCD on it for maximum precision applications, you can get out some fingernail polish remover, get a Q-tip, and actually go ahead after the rifle's been painted and selectively remove any excess paint from any of the contact surfaces in which the scope mounting hardware is going to contact the receiver or the base. It's actually okay to paint right over the top of the screw heads. One of the best ways to probably do it is to wait until the scope and mount is fully attached. You've got the rifle zeroed, you're used to it, you have settled where you want that to be mounted, at which point then I like to go ahead and paint the scope, the mounts, and the rifle all put together. And any of the paint that gets over the top of the heads of the screws is actually going to inhibit penetration of water and other things into there that would normally seep in, and they can actually act to prevent corrosion and prevent solvents from getting into there that you don't want in your screws. Next thing you're going to do is affix the lower scope rings to the scope base. Same things apply, the same steps we just talked about, making sure everything's seated together, break in that micro texture. Then you're going to want to determine the proper optic placement. This is very important before you get everything tight down and zeroed. You're going to want to set the eye relief for the ergonomic majority, the 90% that you're going to do with your operational environment. This depends on your position you're going to be shooting in 90% of the time. If you are a bench rest shooter, 90% of the time you're going to want to set the eye relief for the ergonomics of you sitting in the bench rest position. If you're going to be prone 90% of the time, shooting prairie dogs out in the field with no bench, then you're going to want to set your eye relief to that. If you shoot from a variety of real-world positions, standing, kneeling, seated, prone, left and right-handed, supported, unsupported, then you're going to want to go ahead and make sure that your eye relief is adequate in all those different positions. I like to make sure I have enough distance away from my eye so that whatever shooting position I'm in that has the shortest amount of natural eye relief, that I'm not going to get a scope in the eye. For example, sometimes if you're laying prone, your forehead naturally gets closer to the rifle due to the angle. I like to make sure that in the prone position that I have the proper eye relief at maximum magnification. But again, you're going to want to get everything set up for the way that you're actually going to shoot in the field. You're also going to want to consider the clothing you're going to wear. If you get everything set up ergonomically for your eye relief and your scope position, there is a difference to how you're holding that rifle in the winter and the summer. In the wintertime, you're wearing very thick clothing and the rifle's going to be farther away from you. In the summertime, when you take off that winter coat and that vest, that rifle's going to be closer to you. So you have to be mindful of your eye relief so you don't have the ocular slam you on the eye socket. Of course, other gear is going to be the same, whatever armor, whatever kit you're wearing, load-bearing equipment, etc. Make sure your scope is set up for the proper position using all the equipment you will actually use in real life. You're also going to want to make sure that you have your scope and eye relief set up for the proper recoil control style you're going to use on the rifle. We get into this at Rex Defense when we do marksmanship instruction, but there are different styles of recoil management depending on the discipline of shooting you're doing. It will make a major difference if you're utilizing free recoil management techniques or if you're using more positive recoil management techniques such as the military doctrines. Your minimum eye relief will be more of an issue the less you hold on to the rifle, because the movement of that rifle is going to be greater the less biological input you put onto it. So be mindful of your management style. Make sure everything is set up to be as safe as possible for whatever conditions you're going to put that weapon into. Okay, so now I'm going to take the Optic and I'm going to lay this on here and get a basic idea of where it's going to fit. Now I'm going to adjust my cheek piece, get the proper cheek weld for the scope at the height that I have. Right there. I'm going to make sure this is adjusted back and forth to set the proper eye relief so that when I put my cheek piece down with my eyes closed, I open my eyes and I can see a nice crisp 360 degrees around the back of the ocular, and I can see a nice crisp view of the entire picture. So I'm going to get on the rifle again with my eyes closed, open my eyes. If it's not right, I'm going to tweak it. I'm going to move it a little farther back here, about there, okay. So I'm going to close my eyes, get on it, open my eyes. Should be right there. If not, I'm going to move it back and forth until it is. Right about there, pretty close. Okay, so now I'm going to take a look at where I'm at, right here. That's where my eye relief is going to be appropriate. And once you have a pretty good idea where it's at, go ahead and put down your ring caps. After everything is set up for your 90% majority of your operational environment, I would strongly suggest to verify that you do in fact have the proper eye relief in all conditions at least 10 times in a row. You're going to want to get into each position quickly without thinking at least 10 times to ensure you in fact do have the proper placement. It is best to find that out now rather than later when you're actually shooting live ammunition in a real world application. The next thing you're going to have to do is to level the rifle scope. Now there are two different ways this can be done. You will either level the reticle to make sure it is in fact level and not canted to the left or right, or you can level the turrets, the vertical tracking of the Optic. If you plan to use the reticle for 90% of your operational environment, then you're going to want to obviously level the reticle rather than the turret tracking. And the direction the group moves as you turn your elevation turret up and down might be slightly different. If they're exactly the same, that makes it easier, it doesn't matter. But which one you prefer will depend on which way you're shooting. If you're continuously dialing in the scope at long range, then you're going to want to make sure that you in fact have your turret tracking be aligned perfectly vertically. The way you're going to check these is going to be very similar. You're going to simply level the rifle. You can do this by eye or by using special leveling tools. The eye is actually a lot more accurate than most people give it credit for with a little bit of experience. If you are using leveling tools, do make sure you're putting that on an actual level part of the rifle. Some of the receiver components, there are many different stock components on the rifle that are not level. They're not cut perfectly square. So do ensure you have that set up properly if that's the way you're doing it. I actually prefer to do it by eye, as oftentimes you'll find that receiver components and stock components do not completely work out to be square and level. After the rifle is leveled, you're going to want to make sure that's affixed in a steady position. You're simply going to twist the optic in the rings, the screws not being totally tightened down yet, to where either the reticle is level or your vertical tracking is level. You're simply going to hang a plumb bob downrange at the target, and you're going to either line up the reticle, which is as simple as lining up the reticle's vertical section to the plumb, or if it's the tracking, you're going to have the scope dialed down for your 100 yard, your 50 yard, your 25 meter zero, whatever you're doing. And then without moving the rifle, you're going to index that scope and dial it out for long range. You're going to dial it up. You're going to dial up that scope for long range. As that crosshairs moves, it's going to appear to move down from the point you were aiming. So hang your plumb bob in such a way to where your initial aiming point has the plumb bob hanging below it, and that reticle should move straight down that line all the way as far as it can adjust. You can verify this by shooting two groups. Shoot one group at a dot low on the paper, dial up the scope, shoot another group, then get out your plumb bob and verify it moves straight up and down. If it moved up and to the left and up and to the right, then you're going to have to adjust your scope appropriately, if that's the method you're going to use for most of your shooting. Once everything is level, you're going to secure your scope ring caps and torque them down to proper torque specifications using a thread locker, ensuring that the level you just achieved has not been disturbed. It is very common for a lot of scope ring caps. If you tighten down one side first and then the other side, it will pull it in that direction. So you're going to want to make sure that as you're tightening it, it's not pulling it out of whack. For example, if you find that when you tighten down your scope ring caps, it pulls top dead center 3 degrees to the right, you're going to want to set that 3 degrees to the left before you get started so that when it's fully torqued down, it pulls it straight. This is a trial and error type thing. You're just going to have to readjust it until you get it right. Now, this is a point that's critical with your torque specifications. If you over torque your ring caps, you can actually deform the tube of the scope, causing the internal parts of the scope to malfunction, such as the erector group. There are tubes inside of the main tube that are going to slide back and forth to achieve parallax, to achieve magnification, and those things can be prevented from sliding properly if that scope tube is deformed. A surprising amount of scopes that are damaged during the zeroing process, or scopes that people think do not work, are actually caused by the user mounting the scope with too much torque, not understanding that it's easy to deform the tube of most rifle scopes to the point where it inhibits their proper operation. So look up the specifications for the rifle scope you're using to ensure you do not over torque those ring caps. After everything is mounted, go ahead and ensure that everything is in fact in the right place, the operation of the rifle is functional, and then proceed to zero.